Hi, my name is Jeff Burr, and I directed Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3.
My name would be David J. Scow, and I wrote the screenplay for Leatherface.
Hi, I'm R.A. Mihailoff. I played Leatherface.
My name's William Butler, and I played Ryan.
My name is Greg Nicotero. I was the special makeup effects supervisor for K&B on Leatherface.
I'm Mark Ordesky, and I was the junior production executive on Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3, and I'm now the executive vice president of New Line Productions. New Line Cinema started out in the late 60s in New York, distributing sort of obscure kind of art films, you know, Lena Wertmuller, Jean-Luc Godard, John Waters, these sorts of things, and then branching out into sort of exploitation films and eventually into production of films, of which the original Nightmare on Elm Street was not the first, but probably the most notable. The other major franchises that New Line had during this era were the House Party films, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle films. There were a couple of other smaller ones, but those were the two major ones apart from Nightmare on Elm Street. I don't think anyone thought that the second Chainsaw movie was as fully satisfying. It was a bit more heightened, a bit more camp, and the thought of doing something sort of more straight-ahead terrifying might be a good idea. And since we had the rights, in a manner of speaking, in-house already, this thought came up that we should try to do Part 3. I was sort of vaguely aware of the Ed Gein thing, but when I became fully aware of it was through David Scow, who was the screenwriter of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, but at this point was not, who introduced me to Psycho, not the movie, but the book.
David J. Scow. Ed Gein, often cited as the inspiration for Psycho, among other things. He used to live in Plainfield, I think that's the town, Wisconsin, where he led a very quiet, rural life. And he was interesting because about the time Ed was caught cannibalizing, skinning, tanning people, you know, making lampshades and household items and keeping people parts in his fridge and stuff. The serial killer as a phenomenon, especially the kind of berserkly overstated serial killer, was new to America, although, you know, history tells us that people have been doing these kinds of things for ages and ages and ages, and it really shocked everybody.
Jeff Burr, he would wear some kind of mask, a woman's face, a stripped woman's face on his own face, as well as the other things. So I think that's really the inspiration in terms of the direct connection to Chainsaw.
Mark Ordesky. Once you sort of see Ed Gein in one place, you sort of see him everywhere, because, you know, everything that followed from seeing the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre to Silence of the Lambs to a number of other films, you realize how prevalent his mythology sort of became in film.
David J. Scow. The first time that I became aware of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was way behind the curve, at least 6 or 7 years. I'd heard about it before then, because how can you talk about movies and not say that title? It's a very inflammatory title. It's the kind of thing that people really, you know, it's like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I knew about it, but I didn't know any specifics about it, and I finally saw it in a theater about 6 or 7 years probably after it came out. It really is the template for a bazillion guys chasing people through the woods with power tools, everything from Abel Ferrara's Driller Killer, which, you know, wouldn't have gotten made, or probably wouldn't have been called that without the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or the Hollywood Meat Cleaver Massacre, or, you know, there's all these invocations of the title, and none of them comes close to touching it. Like Joe Bob Briggs says, the saw is king.
Mark Ordesky. What's primal about the film, and what still works today, is that the audience surrogate in the theater are actually the minority, that reality is totally skewed, that what seems normal to the protagonist and to the people sitting in the cinema is actually not normal at all. It's completely abnormal.
Jeff's approach to doing the sequels was he wanted to template a lot more on the first movie. There's a lot of stuff involving weird, kind of odd, strange, staticky sounds on the radio, which in the script for this one we called the Conrad noise, which was kind of, your radio would go out whenever something weird was about to happen, you know, that kind of thing. It's just an echo from the first movie. There were other kind of things. There are very subtle astrological things in the first movie that we wanted to reiterate in the third movie. I mean, just by having, you know, astrological brand names and coming up with signs for things that would be in the background and stuff like that.
Jeff Burr. Chainsaw 2 was kind of the movie I was expecting when I first saw Chainsaw 1, because it's wall-to-wall gore and limbs getting sawn off and that kind of thing. And I love the idea of Dennis Hopper in the movie. I just and the fact that he's a Texas Ranger. It's kind of, there's a lot of fun stuff in that movie when you think about it. But I think ultimately it sounds better than it is. But then in reading about the post-production history of it, it was such a quick post-production. It was a miracle that it was halfway coherent. And I did like Caroline Williams, the female lead. I thought she was kind of a real breath of fresh air. I felt, okay, she was a radio DJ in the second movie, so I figured, okay, she's now a television reporter tracking down Leatherface, and really that's her vendetta, or her whole reason for living is being a reporter tracking down Leatherface. So she has a little wordless cameo if you look quickly.
Mark Ordesky. Bob Shea was a big fan of the genre and the franchise. DeLuca was like, you don't get anyone more deeply kind of steeped and knowledgeable about all film genres, but particularly that genre, than Mike. And I was happy just to sort of be his mascot, frankly, at that stage of the game. This is an era and time when those sorts of films were also a good business. They were the films, really attended, predominantly by, young men, teenage, boys and young men, and so therefore it was also a great business as well.
Jeff Burr, the limited partnership or corporation or whatever set up for the investors of the Chainsaw, sold the rights to make a third and fourth movie to New Line for a fairly high price, which was deserved. And New Line would then kind of kickstart a franchise, a new franchise of Chainsaw movies.
David J. Scow. Kim Henkel was always trying to mount a sequel to either the first or the second Chainsaw. Kim wanted to do his own take on it, and in fact wrote a really elaborate treatment of his own take on it with Toby. And so 5 years later, I think the fundamental difference between the first sequel and the second sequel is by the time that they got to the second sequel, New Line had acquired the rights to Leatherface, the character, and wanted to franchise him in the same way that Freddy Krueger was a franchise in the Nightmare on Elm Street films. They wanted to make a sequel with an eye toward doing more sequels after that, exactly the same as the Freddy movies. And so we had to account for the characters in terms of making them possibly last more than one movie.
Jeff Burr. But that's a problem with sequels to begin with. Everybody says, oh, well, the second one or the third is not as good as the original. And that's just a classic sequel trap. I mean, you can name on one hand sequels that are considered better than the original.
David J. Scow. People who criticize sequels unduly tend not to understand how sequels are structured. Sequels are designed to enlarge on the original property. The original, in the case of any sequels, the original will remain the most potent form, probably, because that's the only point at which it's new. When you sit down to do sequels, it's always about making them bigger, faster, longer or more intense. So when you do sequels, you have an invisible cadre out there of people waiting to jump on you for the first deviation from the original film, which proves they don't understand what sequels are about all along. Look what you did, you ruined everything in the first film, you ruined all this stuff. It's like, what are you talking about? The first film is still there. Go watch that. If you're gonna pick that nit, and these are usually by, like some guy in Iowa who reads Entertainment Weekly and thinks he's a fucking director. So, the criticisms aren't worth anything to begin with, but a lot of people scream when you do anything different from the original template. And unless you just want to do a straight-ahead carbon copy, you have to vary it. And kind of the mandate of sequels is to make it different and make it bigger and twist it all around. Look at the first Alien movie. It has one alien. Look at the second movie. It has hundreds of them. That's the idea.
This was back in the 80s where it was just starting to be real sequelitis. I mean, the Nightmare on Elm Street movies kind of really kicked that into high gear in terms of a quote-unquote franchise, horror franchise. And because I never considered the Romero films a franchise, even though I mean, obviously they were, because they were so different. Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and the Day of the Dead. I thought they were just three completely different takes on a subject, and that's kind of a thematic. The idea of zombies, that's kind of a thematically rich, metaphoric, film subject. And all the three movies have kind of that resonance in their own time. So I never considered that a franchise, but in the 80s, really, with Nightmare, I think that was, and I guess Halloween, that was really the big start of, I mean, yeah, so you could argue that Universal horror movies back in the 30s and 40s, that was kind of a franchise thing. They kept doing sequels. But in the 80s, that's really when it started. So, but I never considered, I considered the second movie to be, of Chainsaw to be it. You know, I mean, okay, the original director went back and did another one. It didn't do that well at the box office. The end.
Mark Ordesky. New Line was still very much the house that Freddie built. I mean, New Line was doing a number of films, but it was still sort of the Nightmare on Elm Street film that we would do every other year, essentially, that really drove the revenues of the company. There were a lot of other good films that we did during those early days, but Freddie was definitely the motor. It creates a sort of a, nothing is predictable in the film business, but it creates what one hopes is a predictable revenue stream, and you can hopefully predict that there will be a certain degree of success affiliated with that film. And if you know that's coming every 12, 18, 24 months, then it helps you sort of weather the vagaries of Hollywood and the movie business.
David J. Scow. When they first approached me, I had been publishing fiction for about 10 years, so that was nothing new, but screen was something new. It was another frontier that I wanted to sort of get into anyway, and I didn't have a plan, because if I had had a plan, I would have had a screenplay. So I assumed that somebody would approach me to adapt something, but I'd contributed fiction to, there were a couple of books called Book of the Dead, which were based on Romero's zombie sort of apocalypse universe, and I had contributed to every volume of that, and I was kind of prevalent in whatever magazines and stuff were up and running then. Midnight Graffiti, Twilight Zone magazine, Weird Tales, even. It was Kevin Morton who walked up one afternoon in the office and said, "So, what would you do with Leatherface?" And I said, "You mean Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre?" And he said, "Yeah, we want to see if we can mount a series of movies off of this." And that was, I can't tell you the date, but that's exactly how it started. And I came into New Line because Mike DeLuca is that rarest of creatures. He's like a producer who actually reads. He's a producer who can read. And he had read some of my short fiction, a couple of my novels, and that kind of thing, and he wanted to drag that sensibility into the movies they were making at New Line. So, about the time that he first got in touch with me, or we first started having meetings in the offices, they were on the brink of doing their 5th Nightmare on Elm Street film, which was Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, The Dream Child, which is what it wound up being called, although when you're developing these things, they have like myriad different titles. He said, "Would you like to write this Freddy movie?" And I said, "Sure." I wrote a treatment for them called Freddy Rules that he really liked. And he said, "Great, now all we have to do is see a script you've written." And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and his expression began to melt as he realized that I was perhaps the only person in Hollywood without a script in their back pocket. I had never written a screenplay before, and so I did not get that gig. Meanwhile, in the interim, they were doing a Freddy TV series called Freddy's Nightmares. And I pitched to the producer of that series, who was a guy named Jeff Freilich, and wound up writing one of the last episodes written for that series, which was a show called Safe Sex. And on the day that I delivered the first draft of Safe Sex to New Line, within 24 hours, and I remember this because it was a Friday the 13th that this happened, and I believe it was January '89. I could be wrong on that. But within 24 hours of me submitting the first draft of Safe Sex, they hired me to do Leatherface, which was their next horror project after Nightmare 5. So I do a draft and set on Leatherface. A draft and set is a first draft, a revision, and a polish. and then you pick it up sort of a la carte if you need more work on it as you go from there. And somewhere between those drafts, they called me up and they said, we're shooting Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Child, right now, and we want you to polish all the dialogue. After having read the first draft of Chainsaw, they said they wanted me to polish all the dialogue. So I wound up being the last writer to work on Nightmare 5. There was literally a guy taking pages from my house to the set. So he would show up, and it was like, out of the machine, go. This was before everybody had a fax machine, and nobody had email. So the Chainsaw experience and the Freddy experience were kind of intermixed in a way. And also, as a result of doing all of that, somewhere along the way, I wound up working for Jerry Olson, who had directed my Freddy's Nightmares TV show, also directed the trailer for Nightmare 5, and I wound up being Freddy's hand in the trailer, so I have played a portion of Freddy Krueger on film. And this is all while Chainsaw is going on, being written. In fact, the closest that Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I got to Texas was when I wrote the second draft, which I actually wrote in Texas at Joe Lansdale's house in Nacogdoches.
Mark Ordesky. I was sort of the junior exec. It was my job to sort of follow Mike and David Scow around and sort of like, you know, basically do whatever they told me. And that's how it sort of started. And David's first draft, which I still recall clearly, was, I remember waiting. David was flying in from somewhere with the script, and everyone was waiting. It was like a Friday afternoon, evening. And when we read it, I mean, obviously, it was a complete NC-17 script as written at that time, but it was absolutely terrifying and evocative and terrific. And I remember thinking at the time, are we ever going to be able to execute this movie on the level that the script exists at? We were in sort of active pre-production, and it was getting very close to the start date, and there was still no director. There was a targeted start date, and the train was moving, and someone needed to engineer it. Inevitably, one starts with a list of potential filmmakers, and then one whittles it down based on availability, interest, and so on.
Jeff Burr. When I did Leatherface, I had made 2 previous features and some short films. I had gone to film school at USC, made a short film there that won a lot of awards, gotten some development deals, and then finally, I'm really an independent filmmaker at heart and in spirit, and it took me a long time to realize that, but it's really true. So my first movie was just made totally independently. It's called The Offspring, and it starred Vincent Price and Cameron Mitchell and Rosalind Cash. It's kind of a horror anthology in the vein of Tales from the Crypt, the old English Tales from the Crypt and Asylum and those kind of movies. And so we made that for a very low amount of money, and it got a release and got some good reviews and made a little dough. So subsequent to that, I made a movie called Stepfather 2. We got hired by ITC, and then we made Stepfather 2, my partners and I, my brother and this guy Darren Scott, who we did the first film with. And that was successful. It was supposed to be a made-for-video thing that Miramax ended up picking up, and it went theatrical, and which actually came out around the same time as Leatherface. So it was a real strange period. So anyway, but basically I was very, I was relatively inexperienced, but full of vim and vigor and enthusiasm, and not knowledgeable. I mean, I had made 2 feature films, so I knew schedules. I knew how to get past some of the pitfalls that can fall into low budget filmmaking.
I think New Line started with a short list of directors. I don't know how many directors they actually had on the list, but Jeff was on the list mostly for his ability to realize sequels to things, having just done the Stepfather sequel. They said, well, if you could do that, you could do this, which is as frequently happens in Hollywood. I said, if you can do this thing over here, you should be able to do this thing over here. And he fell out the far end of the sifting process. He was the director of the film.
I was in post-production on Stepfather 2, about to finish in April, May, and I had a meeting. My agent said, hey, New Line's looking for a director for Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel, or reinvention or whatever. And so I had a meeting, this was April or May, something like that. and it went okay, but like I was one of probably 100 directors they met with, and didn't hear anything more about it. And they went through a whole bunch of other names, and I mean, John McNaughton was talked about, and I'm sure some of the Nightmare directors, like Jack Shoulder and those kind of guys. So I don't know. I mean, I know that John Hess they had talked to. Anyway, so I found out later that they actually had hired someone, that he was actually on the movie for a while, and in pre-production, and had to leave the project for whatever reason. The reason I was told was he had an outstanding commitment with Fox to do a TV show. So I didn't realize they really basically, and I don't mean to sound whiny about it, because I'm not. I mean, look, I took the job too, but it's just psychologically, what you have to realize is if the executives really didn't want you in the beginning, then if you make some kind of waves or stand up for what you believe in, they're going to hate you even more. So there's one thing, if they really want you, then you go, hey, you know what, we got to do it this way, they tolerate it. But if they really basically didn't want you, they had to have some warm body in there, that's when problems happen. But I really think they probably saw, I'm not kidding, they probably saw 20, 30, 40 directors, if not more. And so guys, go through your horror film annuals, go through your Fangoria issues from like 88, 89, and you'll probably, every director that it's a profile in there was offered the movie or had meetings on it. So there really wasn't any time to, and on that time we had to cast, we had to location scout, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of work had been done already through the other director, but no casting had been done. So really I had no time to think other than, just do it. But it was a difficult thing to find a DP that they would approve, because we had this thing called mutual approval, which is for directors it's BS, because basically it means they can veto anything you say, even though ostensibly you can veto anything they say. But so I had a couple DPs I wanted to use that they wouldn't approve for whatever reason. And again, it's like I think they were approaching it like a big real movie, and it didn't have the budget of a big real movie, and it should have been approached much more, and in my mind, much more guerrilla style. And shoot it in Texas in 16mm or whatever. Why not? I mean, but so anyway, a lot of work had been done before I came aboard, so it was a lot of work to do. So there really wasn't any time to think. It was just go. And in terms of the script, there wasn't. We could not. I would have done much more work to the script before shooting if I had been left to my own devices. I mean, I would have made probably a different movie, but there was no real time because the sets had to be built, or we had to use the sets that were built already. Like the house was built from the ground up, the family house, so that was like already built pretty much by the time I came on. So a lot of decisions were made that I would not have made. But that's again, I don't want to sound whiny because it's not. I mean, you accept those conditions when you come aboard a movie at that late stage. The big difference on this movie for me personally was I didn't realize they really didn't want me, but also I had no support group in terms of on the production. I was just a guy there, an island. So again, and the other movies I had my brother and Darren Scott, who subsequently did a movie for New Line called Menace to Society, produce for me. So there was definitely a safety net or protection where I could trust them to deal with stuff, and they would understand what I wanted and try to fulfill it. So it was much more. A whole bunch of people, is a gauntlet of people you had to run through to make a decision. And I'm not, that's not the way I like to work, and I don't think any director likes to work that way. And it's really not the way I really, in spirit, I am. I'm much more of a independent filmmaker type mindset. The guys I love are that way too. So it was really the first time that I had to deal with kind of a corporate structure, even though New Line at the time wasn't owned by Time Warner, and it was an independent company, but it was a big independent company, and it was a weird time at New Line because the Nightmare on Elm Street movies were Nightmare 5 had opened around the time we started shooting Leatherface, and it did okay, but it didn't do what they thought it would. So I guess they thought that series was kind of running out of gas, and you know there was I can't say there was panic, but there was definitely some concern over, okay, what's going to be our next cash cow, you know? So and I don't know if they ever thought Leatherface would be that, because but it was definitely, you felt the pressure a little bit. But it definitely would have been looser, absolutely more guerrilla style, and not necessarily looking like the original movie, but certainly to me that's like the best way to shoot these movies, in terms of shoot for as long as you need and kind of get away from the traditional Hollywood approach. If we were in Texas, it might have been better, but no, we were in the studio zone, so it's a matter of a quick drive up, and they're there.
Mark Ordesky. Well, it was a hard shoot. There was a lot of nights, obviously, a lot of really intense physical stuff. But nothing beyond like the norm on any kind of low-budget horror movie where where things are hard.
Shooting night for night in real locations, exterior, when that sun comes up, it's over, So that was frustrating. That was a frustrating thing for me. And I never worked with a DP that I worked with on the movie, a guy named James Carter. Very good guy to work with, and subsequently he's gone on to some pretty big movies. It was just there was like a learning curve between the two of us as well. So, and it was for the kind of movie it was a relatively short shoot. It was like roughly a 30-day shoot. But today that seems very luxurious. So it was a 30-day shoot, but there were a lot of complications, within that.
The Kate Hodge character, she's become a different person than she was at the beginning of the movie, was the entire point.
It was her first movie, and she was just terrific to work with. I think the reason I cast her was she had been directed. She had done a little part in a movie in Europe. I think Paganini, which was the only film directed by Klaus Kinski, who was one of my favorite actors. So the fact she worked with Klaus, I think, really was a feather in her cap, and so I cast her. And she did a great job. She was incredibly cooperative and just a lot of fun to be around, and very just threw herself into the role. The whole deal, her character arc is, in the beginning she can't kill the armadillo on the side of the road, and Bill Butler has to kill it for her. But in the end, she can. She is through either madness or sanity. She can become violent, and she ends up basically killing Leatherface, or not killing Leatherface, as the case may be, with a rock. In terms of she couldn't kill the armadillo, but now she can kill Leatherface. So she's grown or devolved, depending on your point of view. In terms of sometimes you do have to, sometimes violence is the answer, in some self-protective way. But in terms of thematic stuff, I mean, it's a primitive movie. I mean, and that's its strength. And it really it's one of these. It's an elemental movie, and that's all horror films are at the core. They really deal with very elemental human responses, and fear of death, or trying to overcome death, your own mortality, and also just that kind of nightmare logic, where it's kind of a cathartic, run through this primordial forest, and you escape you either escape or you don't at the end, and you're either a better man for it, or you learn in your dreams. So then when you face reality, you're better equipped. Perhaps. I really believe there's a power to horror films that, and not to say that Leatherface, used all the power, but there is a power and a reason for horror films, and the good ones always function at a very elemental, primal level, and they resonate, and some of the family stuff, I think, in this movie, to me, resonates a little bit, because what I wanted to do originally, which would have been great, is to have a scene with Kate Hodge in the very, very beginning of the movie, where you see her with her family, and she doesn't get along with her family. There's all these bad. The family, her true family, doesn't provide her anything, and then through some sick subversion, Stockholm syndrome, kind of thing, she ends up getting kind of something from some of these family members, in her ordeal that she didn't get at home, kind of thing. So it's the kind of sick juxtaposition, and which would have, I think, made the family stuff resonate even more in the movie.
William Butler. At the time, Viggo and I were living in the same house. It was a house that was split into two, and he and his ex-wife lived in one side, and I lived on the other side, and we became really good friends. We actually worked on a movie called Prison together years ago that was directed by Rennie Harlan, and we instantly became friends. He read the script, and I got back from the gym one day, and he's laying there watching TV, and he goes, "Hey, I read that script," and I was like, "Yeah," and he's like, "I'll be in it," and I was like, "You're kidding me." So I called Annette Benson and said, my friend said he'll come in and talk to you about doing this movie. And she was kind of like, "Who's your friend?" And I was like, "Viggo Mortensen." She was like, "Give me his number." He has an amazing sense of humor. Like, that hasn't come out yet, but it will. He is one of the funniest people you ever meet. He's extremely funny. So I'm sure he was doing some unorthodox stuff at his audition.
Jeff Burr. And there's a little story about his casting. He had actually done a film that was called Prison, and I'd seen, and a friend of mine wrote it, and I knew the guy who directed it. And so I'd seen the movie, and I thought he was terrific in it. And so I brought him in to read for this, and he did not give a particularly good reading, an audition, but so what? I mean, there are a lot of people that really don't give great auditions, but their body of work, he had film, he'd done the lead in a film.
It was awesome because we carpooled to work, If I was hungover, I always knew he would be hungover because we partied together, so that was a good thing. And he instantly became friends with Kate, and I also think that he really made the character a lot more interesting than it was. I mean, it was like sort of a psychopath, but he came up with the whole thing of painting his fingernails and the female apron. He wanted to have this whole like weird, ambiguous bisexuality thing going on, which is awesome. And it's perfect for that creepy family, But yeah, it was an awesome time. I mean, it's like you're going on this amazing adventure. What better way to go than with someone who's one of your closest friends,
He played this sort of the eldest brother, sort of, and he was a sort of, kind of hair trigger kind of, character that was sort of probably the most kind of overtly physically dangerous vibration from him of all the characters, because he made no efforts to sort of mask his intensity, that character particularly.
He's almost the public face of a very private family. Tex is the one guy that you could send to the supermarket and not, have the police suspect him of anything immediately, in that neck of the woods. The scene that introduces him is specifically designed to mislead you into believing he's a potential good guy, because everybody else is so odd looking, and behaviorally weird. But Tex is our Norman Bates. He's our Ed Gein character because he looks normal, but he ain't. And he seems like he can be trustworthy, and like the cook in the first movie, he also seems like he could be a potential savior for our other characters at some point. And of course, that's almost always wrong in a horror movie, folks.
Mark Ordesky. It must have been after he did, his first film was Indian Runner for Sean Penn, so it must have been after that. But there was no particular standing. We were just trying to cast people that we thought would be appropriate and organic, to the roles.
Jeff Burr, Joe Unger, terrific character actor. He's from Tennessee, and which I'm from Georgia, so that was like a good bonding thing. And we put him through hell. He auditioned for us probably 5 times, and which it happened. So it was a long process for him to get the role, but once he got it, he really just dove in. And he'd been in a movie called Go Tell the Spartans with Burt Lancaster. Did a great job in that, and he's been in tons of stuff. He did the Dwight Yoakam Western, South of Heaven. In the original script, or in the script, the first script that I got, he was much more. He was like the mastermind behind some of these gadgets, and there was much more of a technology aspect to the script. They've kind of found technology, and they're kind of trying to use that to snare victims as well as just brute strength. And so he had like a melting, like a kind of a metallurgic melting pot. That was a budgetary consideration. It was thrown out for budgetary reasons.
The new version of the adopted family being kind of more technologically savvy, I wanted them to have accumulated from a series of victims past little computers, radios. They have contacts, so they're almost like aliens on another planet observing our culture through our media. And that would allow us for a couple of things to exploit the idea that if you were just dealing with people based on the people you'd seen in television commercials, you would treat them completely differently. But another technological aspect of Tink's pursuits was chroming all of these animal bones they found. In fact, the idea was that anything within the periphery of their influence, if you saw the house as the center of a radius of kind of malignancy that went out and out and out to the outer reaches of wherever their influence stretched, that would be the last place you would find an animal tagged with one of Tink's chromium ornaments. And so, and then every member, the members of the family were supposed to have them, and additionally, they were supposed to have replacement body parts that he had made out of chromed bones. Tink's death originally was he falls into his vat and is chromed to death. I think that Jeff actually came up with the idea of giving Alfredo the Polaroid, because initially when we sat down to not Jeff and I, because Jeff came in, he had just come off Stepfather 2 and had like a week of prep or 2 weeks of prep or something. But when we were talking about the script in-house at New Line before Jeff came on to direct, some of the other influences of the earlier films were dispersed through other characters, some of whom got eliminated. One of whom got eliminated because he was just too close to Xerox of Chop Top from the second movie. So Alfredo is kind of the, he's the tangential kind of wilder, not exactly a family member, but not out. He's got one foot in each camp, so to speak, as I recall him in the script anyway.
Jeff Burr. So he's very much aligned with the family and kind of a helper, but there's still some kind of animosity a little bit between a rivalry or whatever between them. So and Everett was, again, a lot of that stuff was all him, and he was terrific to work with. I've worked with him subsequently several times too, and but he was very funny.
William Butler. I was really happy to be a part of that film. It was the first time I got a movie where I didn't know really anyone. I got called in through submissions, and I had met Jeff before. I didn't really know him.
We went through various things, because that was kind of like a sketchily written character, so we kind of went through different casting suggestions on that, and came down to a few people, and they were kind of different physical types, and he was kind of the most boy next door and Bob Shea like that about him. So I mean, Bob Shea was like kind of had to sign off on a few, like the two leads, and he liked he thought he was kind of like Michael J. Fox a little bit.
R.A. Mihailoff. My first experience in front of the camera happened when I was 17 years old. Paramount Pictures shot a film in our local city, and I got a job as an extra. The title was Been Down So Long It Looks Like Up to Me. It was a very popular book, and that's why they made it. They made a movie out of it. It was a countercultural, very popular among the counterculture. It was written by Richard Farina, who died a legendary death after on his way home from a party celebrating the publication of the book. He got killed in a motorcycle wreck. He had some relation by marriage to Joan Baez, so it was a big deal counterculture thing. But Paramount decided to capitalize on it, make a movie out of it, and they shot it and decided it would never be released. Gunnar Hansen originated the role of Leatherface.
Leatherface in the first movie was played by an actor, a local actor named Gunnar Hansen, who was cast fairly late in the game, I think, just because he was a physically big guy, and they wanted someone physically imposing. But he's not really, when you get down to it, he's not really that physically imposing in person. The way they shot him accentuated his height, but he's not like a bodybuilder or and he wasn't at the time. He wasn't not like a a muscle-bound bodybuilder. He wasn't that type at all. I had met Gunnar Hansen at some like a video convention or something, and hung out with him in Vegas. Went to a strip club in Vegas with him once, and it was a night to remember. And so I felt an obligation to offer it to him, and also with the idea that if we get Gunnar in this movie, it would be kind of the real sequel, because he didn't play the Leatherface in the second one. So I called him up, and I guess he was aware the movie was being made, vaguely. So anyway, so he basically turned it down because they wouldn't pay him more than scale. And I could see New Line's point because, you know, it's a guy in a mask, you know. But I felt it was kind of important, and I wish we could have gotten him.
I read about it in the LA Times, and I saw that my good friend, my dear friend, Jeff Burr, had been hired to be the director. We did a student film together at USC, and the way that happened was there used to be a trade paper for actors, and I saw their ad in the trade paper for performers. It was a Civil War epic, as far as a student film can be, and I had recently moved to California with several friends, and we had spent several seasons acting live on stage as settlers and Indians. So we were, the qualifications for the actors in this student film were able to handle muskets, ride horses, and do military drills. And we'd spent, you know, a great deal of time before that, so we were a ready-made cast and crew. Cast. Half of us were from northern states, half of us were from southern states, so we were, you know, we were just the natural cast for this thing. And I grabbed everybody, and we all went down to USC and said, here we are to solve your problems.
It was my Apocalypse Now at USC. It was like a war movie that grew and grew and grew, and ended up dropping out of school and to finish it. And you know, actually, I look back on that. It was like a really great experience to make. 'Cause again, and that kind of informed my kind of directorial writing, filmmaking thing, where it just is completely independent, and you only have to answer to yourself. Which, you know, in Hollywood is kind of you know, the two greatest words in Hollywood. It's not money. It's not you know, Mercedes-Benz or anything. It's final cut, and any director worth his salt will tell you that. So anyway, so R.A. had he wasn't even the star of the movie of the student film. He was just an actor in it, and so I thought he would be terrific for Leatherface.
And so I waited and waited and waited for him to call me. Pure hope on my part. I've always, you know, I mean, I'm quoted in magazines as saying I've always wondered how to play the monster. So I brought him in, and we did see other people, but he was by far the perfect choice for it. Let's see. I'm huge, I'm strong, so at least I fit that part of the equation perfectly. One thing that I differ from Gunnar and anyone else, as far as I know, I'm left-handed naturally, and the chainsaw is a right-handed chainsaw. So to get comfortable with that chainsaw, the summer before I did the picture, I was working as a framing carpenter. So I started using my worm drive, huge skill saw. Started using it right-handed, and that helped me prepare to use large power tools right-handed. The difficulty was not particularly difficult, except when you needed to hold it in one position for a long time. Otherwise, I mean, you know, it wasn't bad at all. I believe that's why they call it acting, you know. I think you can sit and tell jokes and drink coffee and smoke cigars and read, you know, motorcycle magazines, and then when it's time to step in front of the camera, you go to work. From my perspective, it was fantastic. I mean, come on. When you work on a movie, they call you sir. They practically lead you by the hand from your trailer to the set and back. When you go to work, You should stop by the lunch truck and get something to eat. Then you go to your private trailer and you lay down and read the newspaper or watch a little TV, and then you get called to lunch, and then you have a nice lunch, and then you go take a nap after lunch, and about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning they call you out for a few minutes of work, and then you go back and drink some beer.
Leatherface is the son of a very, very deranged family. I guess we find out years later, obviously, that he is the son of a family. And I don't know, just a horrible killing machine who thrives on, murder and mayhem.
Well, he's the first of our sort of franchise movie serial killers that doesn't say a whole lot. A lot of people overlook the fact that in the first Chainsaw movie, Leatherface is technically in drag for about a third of the movie, right? So he's got this identity problem with the wig and the lipstick and everything, or gender problem, actually. It's a gender identity problem with the wig and the lipstick. And he was perceived, and is always perceived, influentially, especially in terms of the films that Chainsaw inspired. He was perceived as the powerhouse unit of the family group. He was the unstoppable force. He was the thing that would not go down. And I think that's the thing that inspired most of the movies that followed, where you have giant, mute killers with garden tools or kitchen implements, running around and being. They're all trying to fill Leatherface's shoes, basically, because he got there first.
R.A. Mihailov, he was an adolescent now. And he was going to become a rebellious adolescent. I think if his original concept, David's original concept of the character had been pursued the way he wanted it, he would have been, like I said, the rebellious teenager. David will tell you more on that, I'm sure.
In the earlier movies, he's more childlike. It was very conscious in the third movie to make him. He's grown out of his childlike phase and he's into his rebellious teen phase. So stay out of my room, kind of thing. And because at one point, and we even reiterated the drag from the first movie. This didn't get done when it was shot, but in the script, there's a scene where he has the makeup and a huge pink punked out wig on and a biker jacket and a ballet dress on.
He was really like a very much like a teenage delinquent. That was kind of the idea.
He has no real intellect. I would say he's mindless or childlike as a result of injury. I don't know. I would have to assume that the catastrophic injury that destroyed his face may have destroyed his vocal cords.
Well, Leatherface's job, you'll notice that Mama, who's in the wheelchair, is now too old to bear children. The little girl is now too young, and Leatherface's job is to invent, like, little Leatherfaces, basically. That's where we get the female victim who's in the beginning of the film, who manages to escape and warn Ken Foray, and ultimately Kate Hodges' character, Michelle, is like doomed to that same sort of fate. I mean, Mama says the line, he makes the most beautiful babies. So presumably that's where the little girl came from, is one of the past victims, and so we're talking, Leatherface, the next generation kind of thing.
I hope the humor in the movie is from a real place, not a jokey place, and I think that comes across in the movie. It's situational and character-driven and organic, not tacked on like a lot of horror movies, or kind of funny because they're scared to be scary, And I think the humor comes out of the characters in this.
Mark Bordeski. It was part of the script. I don't know if it informed the script writing, but the idea that the Saw is family, the idea that again, like in the sort of vein of I Am Legend, that this was a family, this was a community, and the dynamic, the drama of it all comes with the intersection of these people and, quote, normal civilian people, and what happens when those paths collide.
The problem is censors, namely the MPAA.
It was either because it was a different era or because somehow the way Chainsaw 3 was put together, it just somehow had more trouble with the ratings. These sorts of films are why the MPAA exists, is to make sure that films that are that you don't have R-rated films with NC-17 material in it. You don't have PG-13 films with R-rated material. So, you know, this is, you know, they're always going to take a very vigorous kind of line with these sorts, with this genre. I recall it. I remember driving to Warner Hollywood Studios for the first screening of whatever we'll call it, the director's cut screening, and I was with Mike DeLuca. I think he just sort of intuitively knew that at that stage the film was not in final fighting shape, and that there was going to be a lot of concern. You know, there always is. And we were late, and he wanted to go thought we should go get a sandwich, and I was really nervous. I said, well, we really shouldn't be late. I mean, it's the first screening, and Mike was like, no, it'll be all right, we should get something to eat. And when we got there, and we were walking into the theater, he said to me in a sort of very mentor-like sort of way, he said, listen, when the film's over, we're gonna get yelled at. You should just know that and prepare yourself for that now. You know, it's not personal, it's just, you know, that's what's going to happen. And I was like, no, I can't imagine that. And he's like, well, listen, I'm just telling you how it's going to be, so you should just put yourself in that headspace. And sure enough, when the lights came up, we did get yelled at. But again, all director's cuts are never representative of what, you know, when the term director's cut, it's not like what the phrase in the DVD, you know, it's literally, you might as well just call it the first cut, because that's what it really is. It's what the director's been able to do in the 10 or 8 or 12 weeks that he's had since the film wrapped. You know, but it was, when I say yell, it wasn't some kind of like over-the-top thing. It was sort of like, you know, a lot of work to do. You better get to it.
When I went in to write the script, and when everybody else went into making the movie, we knew what ballpark we were playing in, and so you have a sense of where the fence is. You know, we're going to stay, so, yeah, and you look at other Freddy movies and similar movies like that, and you say, okay, well, they did that in this one movie, and they did this other, but it doesn't count because it's a dream, so we have to, and you just adjust all the elements that you're going to put into your screenplay that way. And the MPAA gets hold of it and says, no. They still see your movie as kind of being intense, and they demand that you cut it or you're not going to have an R rating, which essentially says you're not going to have a release because nobody's going to see it if it's not rated R.
An NC-17 film is not going to be seen by all but a tiny minority. But you would just simply make the necessary editorial changes, which again, everybody knows up front. So it's not like it's like, oh, here's this huge shock and surprise, you need to do this. It's known from up front.
Joe Bob Briggs pointed out when he was bad-mouthing this movie on TNT, he said it's a chainsaw movie that has no actual butchery in it, no meat cutting at all. And he's right, God damn it. You know, it's like you cannot disagree with the man. When you don't have meat shots, what we call, like, you know, special effects shots, arms and legs and torsos and spray and pools of blood spraying everywhere, you know, what do you cut?
I think anybody who has a problem with these films, you know, takes things too seriously. I mean, it's an art form, you know, it's a genre art form. It's no less valid a genre art form than, you know, a frock drama, you know, it's just different.
And this is before the MPAA ever became involved. So anyway, so we finally agree on a final cut, which is a hideous compromise, to my mind, hideous compromise. And every director says this, though, so you know it's standard thinking. But it was a hideous compromise.
Compromise is the wrong word because it's not like people don't know. You know, when you set out to make a movie that you know has to be R-rated, you can't use, well, you can, but one can't use the word compromise because it's not like if someone said to a filmmaker, listen, make this film, push the envelope, we want extreme violence, we want the darkest NC-17 film you can imagine making, and then after one makes it, one says, oh, well, actually, now we want an R. You know, that would obviously involve serious compromise. When you're making a film that you know, it's all in how you construct it, that you know is pushing the envelope but still got to exist within an R rating. I mean, you know, that's all a question of advanced planning and how one strategizes in terms of how one covers material. It's hard, though. It's a hard line to walk. It's the same on every R-rated movie that one does. The film was still the film. It just was probably just the volume of gore would be the thing.
I thought it was bad to begin with, you know, and then it became worse, and it literally became incoherent. Some of the sequences in the original theatrical cut that was released domestically. But anyway, we were mixing the movie, cutting the negative as we're mixing. The negatives being cut. All these effects things are being whittled down as we resubmit. I think it was resubmitted 11 times. At the time, it was a record, but I think it's been usurped by other movies now. But the point, in fact, is we missed our release date because of that, which was devastating, and I think ultimately hurt the gross of the movie. I think if it had come out in October, it would have made a little more money.
It seemed to be a perfectly valid, release date. If you look at the coming release schedule for this coming January of next year, you'll see it chock full of films, I'm sure, that the studios that are releasing them hope that they do a lot of money. I mean, ultimately, it's Martin Luther King weekend. There's a lot of films do a lot of business. You have to be careful. You wouldn't want to be releasing sort of Oscar caliber type films in that time, because you've got all the Oscar movies that have been released in December. But for sort of genre movie geared to teenage boys, it was straightforward. I mean, it was trying to be sold as what it was. I mean, no one was going to try any kind of a bait and switch on a movie called Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3. And DeLuca had come up with this brilliant teaser trailer with the chainsaw arcing through the air and lightning flashes. It was great.
Well, again, going back to the concept of Leatherface's adopted family, the thing that unifies them is the saw. Various saws, because you'll notice there's more than one. In Leatherface, there are nice little dirt, just like in your kitchen. There are paring knives, and there are, steak knives, and, there's different chainsaws, the ultimate being the kind of giant Excalibur saw we came up with for the movie.
That was one decision, actually, that I think that Bob certainly made, Bob Engelman and Bob Shea, made the quote-unquote Excalibur chainsaw, which was wholly created by a mechanic in somewhere in L.A. And what it was the expense of making this was great. And this was, as I say, it was kind of a low-budget movie. And so I figured let's not spend I think it was literally like $3,000 or $4,000. Let's not spend the $3 or $4 grand to do this huge chainsaw. Let's just go with regular chainsaws. And they said, no, it's really important. So, and that, in retrospect, they were right.
I remember the sort of the super chromed out chainsaw that we used in the posters and the trailer, including the trailer that Mike DeLuca scripted and conceived, what I call the Lady of the Lake kind of teaser trailer. I remember that quite clearly. Huge chromed out, tricked out chainsaw.
It's that basically that unit, that mechanics that kind of basically provides them the lifestyle they have. So it's basically integral to what they do, and so it has a resonance beyond just the physical saw. It's really what the saw represents, which is basically culling life from the exterior to bring to their family. And that could have been dealt with even more, just some as you say, some Excalibur, like, the saw has kind of a mythic significance to the family, and they kind of revere it, and they do revere the newly created saw, and that's what the character of Tink made for Leatherface, and it's like it's a revelation for Leatherface to get this, because he's never had anything like it. The actual blade, one of the blades, very heavy actually, to the Excalibur, the so-called Excalibur chainsaw, which was wholly created by a mechanic in somewhere in L.A. And what it was what I'm holding in my hand was actually totally due to Bob Engelman and Bob Shea, because the expense of making this was great. And this was, as I say, it was kind of a low-budget movie. And so I figured let's not spend I think it was literally like $3,000 or $4,000. Let's not spend the $3 or $4 grand to do this huge chainsaw. Let's just go with regular chainsaws. And they said, no, it's really important. So, and that, in retrospect, they were right. And that's the other thing. We had a real trouble initially of figuring out what are the normal chainsaws in the movie that are used, who would provide them, and could we actually see the name. And there was one company that let us actually see the name on the movie, which was Still. And they're a big manufacturer of chainsaws. Not that we got product placement from them, but they at least let us use the name. And because it was, I'm sure that was like their legal department, not so happy about, well, what movie is it going to be used in, say the title and, hello. it's that basically that unit, that mechanics that kind of basically provides them the lifestyle they have. So it's basically integral to what they do, and so it has a resonance beyond just the physical saw. It's really what the saw represents, which is, basically culling life from the exterior to bring to their family. But that Excalibur chainsaw was really a marvel of mechanics. It was just beautifully designed and executed.
R.A. Mihailoff, also known as Brew Bronson, the Iron City Savage, 300 pounds of coiled steel and sex appeal, brother. Your question, the Leatherface mask. What is it made out of? It's made out of human flesh. If you watch closely in the beginning of Leatherface Chainsaw 3, you'll see a girl victimized, and if you look real close, you will see a rose tattooed on her face, which ends up incorporated into the newest edition of the Leatherface later in the picture. Well, fortunately for me, as opposed to all the other guys that play monsters, the mask was exactly that, a mask, tied on with leather straps. So between takes, I could drop the mask, spit out the teeth, and other than a little bit of prosthetic makeup around the mouth and the eyes that showed through the mask, I was good to go.
Jeff Burr, in my mind, when we're shooting, that's when the movie really took off and became something different, was when the family members were together, and because they would riff on each other, and I think it's always like a traditional family unit in some way. It's you have the patriarch, who's on his way out, the grandpa, and you got and then you have like kind of the infighting with the siblings, and so in the first one, I really don't know where Leatherface fits in. I don't know if he's treated as a kind of a child who has to be dealt with. I can't remember the true character dynamic in that, but that's one of the interesting things about that movie, was just the interaction with the whole family unit. I think they do have an internal morality. I mean, there's certain things they won't do, or certain things they won't, certain things they won't. They think are maybe wrong to do. I mean, because I think it's like you find this a lot in some of the most repressive people, or repressed people. You find that a lot of times that they act out in different ways. I mean, you could be very, let's say, sexually repressed, but then somehow that will manifest itself in some other way in your life. And so I think that's kind of the interesting thing about that family, is you wonder what, there's a lot of ambiguity there, sexual ambiguity, and so you wonder what would they do, what wouldn't they do, how far would they go, what would they not, what would they consider, oh my gosh, that's disgusting. Because even, it's like when you had some serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas and his partner Otis, there was like some things that Otis would do that Henry Lee Lucas would just go, oh my God, I would never have done that, or vice versa. And so there's this weird morality in this alternate universe.
Pretty extreme in the context of the movie, but not extreme if you consider it in the context of they're just a predatory family. This is no more shocking than the behavior of a pack of wolves in the wild. And they have their pecking order in the family the way a tribal kind of predator unit would have. I mean, the difference is that they're just preying on urban people. We haven't seen a lot of notable packs of killers throughout history, but I think it's more threatening if you're talking about a concerted unit. They can complement each other, and in terms of making characters out of them, then what you do is you assign certain skills to each member of the team, just like you would for a Mission Impossible movie or something. You'll notice that they tend to be more polite to each other than the family members in the second movie. Yeah, that's, again, that's the wolf pack model for the family behavior. There's a definite pecking order, there's a hierarchy, and if you stray outside the hierarchy of your responsibilities, there's some kind of swift transient punishment, but you're not going to get killed or something like that. So it's like a pack of feral people. Insofar as the new version of the adopted family being kind of more technologically savvy, I wanted them to have accumulated from a series of victims past little computers radios, they have contacts. So they're almost like aliens on another planet observing our culture through our media. And that would allow us for a couple of things to exploit the idea that if you were just dealing with people based on the people you'd seen in television commercials, you would treat them completely differently.
I rationalize it by saying either it's this, let's call it a parallel universe, or it's just, second cousins once removed that moved in and were of the same mindset. It's kind of like basically creating a whole new unit, and try to individually cast those for maximum effect. And because the weird thing about the movie is it's kind of like halfway between a real movie, meaning like a mainstream movie, and then an independent horror film, and that's kind of the dilemma of it. And in my mind, it definitely would tip more towards the independent horror film part of it, and it couldn't be too nasty or too this or too that because New Line was releasing it, and so it was a real challenge to get the right looking guys and the right kind of actors, because it was done very much in an LA formal way in terms of the audition process. We had a very good casting director. She was an in-house casting director at the time, Annette Benson, who I've subsequently worked with, and she actually did a great job, brought in some really good people. The effects house that did the truncated effects in the movie, K&B, Greg Nicotero and his boys, they're terrific guys to work with. I worked with them since, and it's Bob Kurtzman, Howard Berger, and Greg Nicotero, the K&B. And many people kind of came in and bid on it. Steve Johnson, and I think several others. Rick Baker didn't, but several other big effects house bid on it. And K&B was like the perfect choice, I think, and they did a bang-up job. They had done a film with a friend of mine called Intruder, Scott Spiegel, and did some terrific effects for very little money on that, and they came in and did a really good job on this. And I guess they had done some of Freddy's Nightmares, and I don't know if they had done Nightmare 5 or any of the other Nightmares, but as an entity, I think it was one of their first movies as true K&B.
Let me give you, for instance, of how we're sitting around a table before this movie is ever being shot and thinking to ourselves, what we really want to do? We really want to cut somebody in half on camera. Well, we've seen it this way, but we want to cut them in half this way, from top to bottom, because in the original script, we had Leatherface having his confusion over cuts of meat versus cuts of people. In the version that Jeff shot, he's got the speak and spell, and he keeps confusing what food is, which is the sense of the original scene, which is where he had a more elaborate computer, and he was filling in the blank spaces on the diagram of a human body with cuts of meat, food parts and stuff. In fact, not too long ago, there was an advertisement for something that had a model, chalked out with rib, rump roast, kind of thing. That was exactly from the original script for Leatherface. So the woman you see in the beginning of the film, who escapes, who gets nailed by Leatherface about halfway through and chopped in half. And it's like, okay, we can't do the grindhouse drive-in approach and actually showing somebody getting sawn in half on screen. So here's how we'll do it. Shoot it from behind the tree, where she falls up against the tree. Leatherface jams his saw into the tree. We see the saw going into the tree at the base and cuts upward. And you do a cutaway from behind the tree, and you do a close-up of Leatherface while this person's getting sawn in half, as the sawdust from the tree swirls around his face as he's cutting upwards, and the sawdust turns red. And then you cut back to the silhouette from behind the tree as the two halves just go flop in different directions.
Greg Nicotero. Reading about Jeffrey Dahmer and how horrifying and graphic it was, but there's still that element of intrigue. I mean, people that are so like, wait a minute, how can our society get to a point where somebody actually is able to eat someone else or murder someone else or mutilate their bodies or skin them? I think that's one of the inherent things about horror movies is that the reason why they're always successful is because nobody can really believe it. You can see it in a movie and you can go, oh, well, this is just a movie. But the fact that somewhere in this society there probably is a person who has done this to someone is so unspeakable that it taps in something in someone's psyche to say, well, how do I keep my kid from becoming that person? Or how do I know my neighbor isn't that person? So there's something really, truly horrifying about that. And I always felt that because of Leatherface's roots in reality, he always seemed to be the most real and the most frightening. On top of the fact that, I mean, look at his weapon of choice. I mean, no one can ever look at a chainsaw and say, "Oh, I'm gonna go cut that tree down." I mean, the minute that somebody has a chainsaw, the first thing they do is they put it over the head and they go, you know, because that's sort of been ingrained in pop culture now. When we were doing tests for Leatherface, we had a fake head of Ken Foray, and the gag in the end of the movie, which changed considerably, was that Leatherface was supposed to spin the chainsaw, and the chainsaw was to catch Ken Foray right in the side of the head and lop the top of his head off. So we made a bunch of gelatin fake heads that Mark Maitre had sculpted, and we went and rented a chainsaw because I wanted to videotape the test for Jeff. So we took mold straps and we bolted the head down to the dumpster in the parking lot of K&B. And we got the rented chainsaw and we started it up, and the guys brought it out, and of course I put Leatherface's mask on while we did the test. At the time I thought, I was like, oh, this is so funny. Now of course I'm going, what the hell was I thinking? It was so goofy. And in the test, you just see me with the chainsaw go, and just cut through the head. The head falls apart, blood sprays everywhere, and then the chainsaw stalls. And I'm like, shit, fuck. But even something as simple as that, I just thought it was funny that, you know, I had to have the mask on, and we had to use the real chainsaw actually. And it was just something about it. It was like, it didn't feel like the whole gag was complete. If I was just a guy with a chainsaw doing a test, it didn't feel like it would have worked as well. Like, I felt like I needed to have the mask on to make the gag work. And of course, blood sprayed over everybody's cars. And then I realized that we had to return the rental chainsaw. And as the blade was spinning, it just sucked all the fake blood. So I had to have my guys take the chainsaw apart and clean all the blood out because we were afraid to go back to the rental place and go, oh, here's your chainsaw, and just plop it on the counter and go, see you. I think, aside from the fake head that we did of Ken Foray, which the way that we staged that, I never felt that it was Tom Bellissimo was supposed to build this rig that the chainsaw is supposed to land in the water, and the chainsaw is supposed to be kind of like the shark from Jaws, and the fins just kind of cut through water, and we're spraying stuff up. So I remember that the gag was supposed to be that he holds his head down and then the chainsaw comes in and cuts through it. And the fake head, we had 2 gelatin heads that we made of Ken in that screaming expression, and we backfilled them with a hollow plaster core with like fake blood and chunks of latex and goopy stuff in there, so that when the chainsaw hit it, that it would spray up blood. And we never really got a good take of it. I mean, it was just one of those things where the blocking and the chainsaw in the water and all this stuff, we never really had the time or got a take where we actually saw the chainsaw cut through, and again, you know, there was such a backlash at that point about things being too violent or too bloody that I think we really started to think about the fact that, well, do we need to show that? I mean, you know, a couple years earlier they probably would have showed the whole chainsaw going all the way through, but it was enough to see it make contact, and then we had we had Ken screaming, and then that was really it. But I thought that the fake head of him was really effective. It looked really good. Mark Maitre sculpted that and did a really great job on it. There was a lot of, what was interesting was there was a lot of small, like, incidental gags, like when Kate her hands are nailed to the chair. We did a fake mechanical hand that had finger movement. and the nails went. There was a foam latex skin, and we actually attached the nail to the chair, and we put the fake hand there, so that you could actually see the fingers moving and the nail embedded. And at the end of the scene, when she escapes, we did a take where she pulls her hand off, and it was the fake hand, and then it revealed, we pull it off, and it reveals the bloody nail still stuck in the chair. And I remember that everyone just went, oh, that was. I mean, and the other shots were really simple because we had a piece of metal that we had bent into a semicircle with the phony nail on the top, and she actually just slid her hand in, and then when we dressed the blood on it, the blood covered the fact that because she really wanted to be able to struggle against the nails holding in place. I thought that was extremely effective. We did a couple other, the dummy of Bill Butler worked out really well. We never really saw, I mean, again, in the script, everything was so visceral that the gag really was that we actually used Bill for the beginning of it when they hoisted him up. And I think that the idea always was that when, anytime anybody will tell you that use the real actor as often as possible. When we actually initially hoisted him up, we used Bill and hoisted him upside down, and we mimicked that Ed Gein crime scene photo. Then we cut to the dummy, and the dummy was hanging in the background for most of the rest of the scene, except for, of course, the close-ups. And then I know that originally, as scripted, they were going to cut his clothes off, because I know on the dummy that we had a big chainsaw wound on the chest, and I thought that was an effective dummy. I mean, there was a lot of gags like that, a lot of things that we did.
My reaction to the film when I saw it was it looked very big and very commercial, but I didn't think it was scary, and I don't think that was any fault by Jeff. It was the way we shot it was extremely scary. It's just that he was up against so many obstacles that they made him take out a lot of the scares and stuff. And I didn't recognize the ending because I think they did more than one ending. I think there was actually 3 endings they did, or 2. And I know there's definitely 2 endings because I didn't recognize the ending that was on there.
Leatherface goes down in the body pit, I think. I'd have to check that to make sure. But it basically winds up with the Kate Hodge character staggering back out onto the highway, having been immersed in the toxic bouillabaisse of the body pit, and by implication being toxified, so that there's a ticking clock on her life now. But she walks back out on the road and begins to hitchhike out of there with the idea that she has prevailed, she has survived all the way to the end of the movie, and she's going to keep soldiering on. She's become a different person than she was at the beginning of the movie, was the entire point. And she goes out onto the road with a dog that was originally one of the what we had in the script, which were called the chainsaw dogs. The family had pet dogs who were also tagged, and when Michelle becomes kind of a warrior, to save her own life, one of the dogs takes a liking to her, and he winds up going off with her at the end of the movie down the road. But the implication is that she might die if she doesn't get to like a medical facility or something after having been in this body pit, but she has survived all the way to the end of the movie. Then there were variant endings that we wrote when we were trying to sort of Elmer's glue that gap that had. She sees the police car coming at her down the highway. She tries to flag it down, and it goes around her. That was one version. She sees a police car coming down the highway at her, and it goes around her, and we see the little girl in the back. That was another version. And ultimately, I think some kind of combination of the police car ending was used. I'm not real clear on on how or why it got shot that way. Although the thing that the fans complain about, quite rightly or quite correctly, actually, is that Ken Foray seems to resurrect from the dead. That certainly wasn't anything I wrote or anything Jeff shot. I think that was entirely done after the rest of the movie was complete and cut, and they were still trying to, appease the censors.
The true fans were not so happy, and it's one of those movies that really basically, the only people I think it satisfied on some level is just people that were casual film goers that had, something else was sold out and they went to the movie and they had no expectations. And it was well publicized, the MPAA problems.
It was not a success, if I remember correctly. I mean, it was not, it was sort of, it did moderate degree of business, but it was not the success that people thought or hoped that it should have been at the time. Well, it was a very low budget film, so it was ultimately not, it's not like there was a huge amount of financial risk involved, and New Line had already covered the majority of the budget through pre-sales and various other things. So it was not like, again, it was more of a, to the extent the film was not a barnstormer, it was simply more of a missed opportunity than it was some financial loss. Mike's attitude was always philosophical, which is that, you're in the movie business is like, it's like the sports business. You win, you lose, you draw. I mean, this was a film where, because of its construction financially, we were not in a position to really take that much of a hit, and it was something that, we clearly wanted to do, and it had not turned out, beyond, it was going to ultimately going to be a moderate performing title.
William Butler. I figured when I heard about the protests, I honestly thought that it was just something that New Line did to, I think at that stage they were desperately doing anything they could to, it's like, well, we're releasing the movie in January. What else can we do to, it's like, I think they were just grasping for, anything to get people in the theaters.
I think it was the Los Angeles Alliance for Survival or some such organization. I don't know, but again, it wasn't like riot police going back. It was like three people with sandwich boards, or placards or poster paper. So it wasn't really didn't make national news. Let's put it that way.
I have very little idea what it was. I didn't really pay any attention to the reviews, or although I was in, I think I was in New York City when the film came out, and it was playing somewhere, locally that they could see it. But I don't remember what kind of box office it did. I don't remember what review-wise. I didn't see anything on the film until years later, where it was just it became a memorable film for kind of the wrong reasons, and it was like sort of the fans got a hold of the idea that there was an unexpurgated version of it out there somewhere, which was, to my mind, never more than kind of an elaborate rough cut. And that's not the same as having an unedited version of a movie. And it had this weird reputation for what it wasn't.
I went to the Fangoria convention January 1990, and I'm a low-profile guy. Nobody knows what I look like, especially at the time. So I'm like, hanging out at the Fangoria convention in line for something. And I hear these two guys talking about, man, that Leatherface movie, man, there was no gore. Nobody got killed in that thing.
The fans are like me. The fans are pretty forgiving.
You work on something, you go away, you work on another project, and then 5, 10, 14 years later, people come up and say, I like this one the best of all the sequels, or I really like this one, and then you say to yourself, oh my God, maybe I was being too hard on my own thing, because somebody likes it. Somebody thought it was cool. But personally, Mike DeLuca and Kevin Morton, Mark Rudetsky, everybody at New Line, if all of those people hadn't been willing to take a chance on this, I never would have had a first TV credit. I never would have had a first feature credit. And so my child may have birth defects, but I still love it to death.
The other thing I'm very happy about, and I've done a lot of sequels, and most of the sequels I've done, I didn't kill the series. So, there was a Stepfather 3, and there was a Chainsaw 4. So regardless of what the reputation of the movie had, somebody out there, liked it and liked it enough to do another one, and again, I think it generated some fairly good money around the world eventually. One thing is, I must say that we owe Tobe Hooper a real debt, just because he's the guy that really, and Kim Henkel. They're the guys that really did such a bang-up job in the first movie that's why we're here talking about the third one. And so we owe them a total debt of gratitude just for making a damn good movie, their first movie. And I hope we expanded on that a little bit in terms of the legacy and added a little to it, and hope that people now can see more of what it should have been or could have been, and see it the best way possible. And that's what's so exciting about 14 years later revisiting it, because I think it did. All directors say this, but I think it deserved a little better rep than it had, and now it's kind of finally working its way up to that.